think it's Wednesday. We are going to talk about why is it never enough? Why can't I be satisfied? I hear this quite a bit from my one-on-one clients. And I want to talk about why you struggle with it never feeling like enough. And as always, Instagram is a little slow to the game. Now, if this is resonating for you, then you know, maybe even had the same thoughts of, nothing is ever enough for me. And I don't understand. Like, maybe your spouse has said it, maybe your parents have said it your whole life, that nothing is ever good enough. And the worst part is like, if you were honest with yourself, you couldn't argue with it too, because on Christmas morning, or when you reach the goals, or when you get that gift you've wanted, you're like, oh man, like, this is what I wanted, but it's like not satisfying. Like, this is different than I thought, right? And that can be really disorienting. So today I'm going to tell you exactly why nothing satisfies you. Please don't beat yourself up, because there's actually a reason to this. Not the pop psychology version, right? No fluff. We're going to get really tangible here. We're going to talk about the clinical, the neurological, the root cause version of why nothing is ever enough, and why you struggle with feeling that deep satisfaction that you're really actually after. And maybe you've Googled it. Now, I talk about why things are never enough with most of my clients. Most of my clients run into this. I've run into this, which is why I know it so well, because it's very much a reality for me. And maybe you've read articles, maybe you've listened to podcasts, and maybe you feel the same way. So if it resonates, like, oh my gosh, why is nothing ever good enough? Why don't I ever feel satisfied? If you feel brave, let me know in the chat, because I would love to know. Of course, I just lost my chat, so let me pull that guy up. Okay, got that. So let's get right to the answer. The reason nothing is ever enough for you, the real reason, the clinical reason, the one that, in my experience, nobody really talks about, especially in the coaching world, which that drives me nuts, like at least get a psychology degree, and especially in the self-help world, they don't tell you this directly, and I want explicit, direct information, but the real reason comes down to this: childhood emotional neglect. And before you check out, because maybe you think, well, my childhood was fine, that reaction for some people can actually be the first symptom. A lot of people aren't clear on what emotional neglect is. Emotional neglect is where you just don't feel supported by your nuclear unit, right? Where you feel ignored. You feel very dismissed when you communicate. And emotional neglect is hard. It hurts. And when we're kids, we don't have the verbiage for it. We don't understand really what's going on, but it can really set you up for like failure, dare I say? And of course, we don't want to have that. Now, to be clear, emotional abuse is, take two. Emotional neglect is not abuse. I'm getting ahead of myself. It's not necessarily a dramatic childhood. By all means, that can be there. And it's, it's not something that really makes the headlines. And in my experience, most people have experienced some form of emotional neglect. Most of the time, emotional neglect is going to be the absence of something, not the presence of something, right? And that's exactly why it can be so hard to identify, so hard to put your finger on. Now, if your childhood was like mine, where you had chronic abuse, and obviously it's probably easier to identify the emotional neglect, but if you had like a fairly good childhood, you might be like, man, I didn't have any emotional neglect. But again, it's typically where you just don't feel supported, you feel ignored, your interest might not even be shared. And you know what? Sometimes we have kids and we don't always connect with them. So it's a real reality. Same with our spouses. But sometimes we can't always point to a scar, especially if no one's ever touched it or touched you, right? Sometimes the only thing that we can point to when we are struggling with, like, why is nothing ever enough for me? Why is it not satisfying? Is more of the fact that there's this emptiness inside of you. And there's lots of things that can create this emptiness, but we're going to really drill down on the emotional neglect piece. And maybe you've been pointing at it your whole life without knowing what you were looking at. So let's get again on that same page of what is emotional neglect. Every child is born with core emotional needs. We need it, right? Especially like when you are in the womb, you are the safest you will ever be. You got constant food, shelter, connection, warmth, like you got all your needs right there, and then you're just ripped away from it, right? That in itself is fairly traumatic, right? But those emotional needs are to be seen, are to be known, are to be valued for who you are, independent of what you do. And it's not for your grades, it's not for your performance, it's not for being the good one or the smart one, it's for existing, period. And a lot of times we have parents where we are just an extension of them. They don't really see our individuality, they don't see our agency, they don't respect our autonomy, and so then that can create situations as well. And when those needs are met, when a parent consistently mirrors back to a child, you are enough, exactly as you are. There are no conditions. This is why conditional love is so damaging. And most of us, if not all, have experienced it. The child's brain, because the child's brain's still developing, builds a secure internal foundation when they get that feedback. But most people never had that childhood of where they felt, I am enough exactly as I am, without needing to perform, without needing to meet conditions. And so, if you have that secure attachment, they are going to develop what psychologists call, again, the secure attachment, and that foundation becomes the platform they operate from the rest of their lives. When you do not have a secure attachment, you're a little bit more hindered in reality. But it's the thing that lets them feel satisfied when you have experienced secure attachment from Jump Street when they win. It lets them rest without guilt. It lets them open a gift and actually feel the joy and the satisfaction and the engagement of it. However, when those are not met, which is most of our experiences, and this is the critical part here, the brain doesn't just miss out. It compensates. It builds an alternative operating system, we could say. And that alternative operating system is built entirely on one premise. My worth is conditional. And this can breed a lot of toxic shame that can, at some point, it will manifest. And it comes down to, are you going to deal with it or are you not? For instance, when you have experienced this conditional worth, which I've talked about quite a bit, it's I am loved when I perform. So there's always a qualification at the end of the day. I am safe when I produce, or when I hit this bar, or when I hit this expectation, right? So everything is dependent on you doing something versus being, and we are human beings, we are not human doings. So it's I matter when I achieve, right? So we fuse them together versus I matter and I can achieve, right? Two separate thoughts that are not tied together. Now, it's not a belief you chose, right? You weren't like, woohoo, I'm only going to be worthy if I do A, B, and C, right? That's not how it works, unfortunately. It's a survival adaptation that your brain made when you were 2 years old, when you were 3 years old, when you were 6 years old, right? Because a child who isn't getting unconditional emotional nourishment has to figure out what does get love, right? Because that's what you're really looking for. And humans really thrive when there is unconditional love. And for most high performers, the answer really did become performance. I don't know if this was your world. It was very much my world. It comes down to achievement. It comes down to being ahead. It comes down to your ambition. It comes down to being the best, right? You have that rejection wound. You want to prove like, hey, I am worthy of your love. And it's really, you're just trying to repair that relationship from the past. Or being the one who never needed help. I see this with a lot of my one-on-one clients where we get really, really autonomous. I am the exact same way, right? Like I'll do it myself. I don't want to ask for help. Now, your parents weren't monsters, and that is not what I'm trying to portray in this message. They probably worked hard. They probably also experienced a lot of conditional love because that's how the generational sin, if you will, moves forward. And they probably loved you in the way that they knew how, in the way that was exposed to them, shown to them at the end of the day. Maybe your dad might have been like really, really brilliant and built something incredible, maybe even lost it all. Or your mom had been like present physically, but emotionally she was overwhelmed or emotionally shut down or emotionally inconsistent. Like at the end of the day, life is happening. And it's hard to be an adult and remember some of these needs of your children when you are like stressed out or when you're struggling or when you're just trying to survive. And those are real situations. I'm not trying to minimize the conditional love at all. I'm just trying to put it in perspective because we also need to give grace and mercy to our parents if they failed at or fell short, right? And maybe your parents did a great job of admiring what you did, like your grades, your hustle, your independence. Maybe that's what got your attention. Maybe that's what got the applauses and the recognition. Some people really need a lot of recognition, others don't. But maybe they never saw who you were, you as an individual. You know, we really do a great job in this world of complimenting people for what they did and what they do, for that human doing aspect. Rarely do we really understand how to be with a person and really lean into that human being quality that really makes us just that, a human being. And you have to remember that our brain as children is developing. And so as a child, your brain cannot distinguish, they don't see me and I'm not worth seeing, right? So we what? We merge it together. So then this, as a child, we make this invisible contract, this like paradigm, right? This limiting belief that we end up putting ourselves in like this glass room of, I will become so impressive, so successful, so undeniably amazing that someone will finally see me and tell me I am enough, and then I will feel it. I don't know if you've done this. I definitely have done something similar. If you feel brave, feel free to share. You never know who you're going to help. But that contract, and it's going to be very, very, very unconscious, is what's running your life sometimes right now, especially if you notice, man, nothing is ever good enough for me. I never feel satisfied. I'm always getting told nothing's ever good enough for me, and it's really annoying, right? Maybe, and I can speak to this one, maybe every deal you close is an unconscious attempt to fulfill it, right? Or every target you set is trying to hit the number that will finally trigger the feeling. Or maybe you're like, man, if I just earn $1 million, my mom or my dad will finally be like, man, child, you're amazing, right? And so we're really trying to do all of this stuff to really actually heal a deep wound that's not going to actually be healed by doing more in that industry or in that avenue. And so, you know, you kind of just set yourself up then for like every gift you open then is another test. Will this be the thing that makes me feel what I'm supposed to feel? And every time it doesn't. Every time you're let down, and maybe as you grow, you're like, man, I really don't like that things are never enough. I'm never satisfied. Like, maybe I just need to be more grateful. And maybe you try the gratitude list and it still doesn't work. And so then you wonder, like, maybe you just didn't do enough. Maybe you just aren't enough, right? Maybe you just start to set the bar even higher. Maybe you sleep less and you work more. Again, you're going back to that doing mentality because that's what you think is going to help you. You're going to try harder. Basically, the problem is you, so you're going to fix it all. And that is emotional neglect at its finest very quickly. It's not a bruise. It's not a scar. It's an invisible wound, really, that's impacted your ultimate overall identity, that produces a lifetime of striving for a feeling that achievement was never and will never deliver on. Like, it will never satisfy you if you're in this pattern, if you're in this framework of like, nothing's ever good enough. Okay, I will try gratitude. Okay, I will try to accomplish more. Like, you're just perpetuating the cycle at the end of the day. Now let's talk about the gap of why you're successful and still empty. Right? And we're not going, just for the sake of conversation, because I have a few therapists that follow me, I'm assuming we don't have any mood disorders or personality disorders, right? We're kind of removing that from the situation here, because like borderline personality disorder can increase emptiness. But I'm also going to argue if you got borderline personality disorder, you had a lot of emotional neglect at the same time. So I guess we could really get into the weeds there. But here's what makes this so incredibly disorienting. And I need to name it directly because I know you feel it perhaps, or you might feel it, let me say it more like gently, and maybe you are struggling to articulate it. And one of the things my clients love is I give language to their sensations, which helps them just get more clarity on why they do what they do. But there's a gap between what you're capable of externally and what you experience internally. And between the person the world sees and the person you actually are when no one is watching. The world sees someone capable, composed maybe even confident, maybe decisive. Maybe you are even really like in control of your emotions too. And high performing in every measurable dimension, right? Like to me, just doing psychometric testings, when I see a high performer, I'm like, okay, these are the attributes they typically have, right? Typically moderate recognition, very high conscientiousness, they've got good trust, they've got good nurturance, they are just like solid. However, I always look at their internal traits around like their self-discipline, their composure, their tough-mindedness, their autonomy, their contentment, their control. I don't know if I said self-confidence, composure, so I'll say those both. That is typically where they ultimately crumble. And so you're all of these things externally to cover up the internal mess, we could argue, that's running on inside of you. The external performance is not fake though. Let me be very clear, because I'm not trying to say that. It's more internally, there's just this different story. Again, the confidence fluctuates, or you don't have any confidence. There's a lot of high performers that I work with that their soul has been pretty much broken or destroyed, and so they don't have good self-confidence, they don't have good self-esteem. And so that's the first thing we want to triage, right? Because that's, you got to have that healthy foundation. A lot of people build their external world and don't build their internal world, which is like building a house on sand or building a house of cards, is really what I wanted to say, right? So it's confidence that fluctuates for no reasons. You can't really explain it, you don't really understand what's going on, but you just don't trust yourself, you're very weary of yourself. Or maybe it's composure that holds 95% of situations but collapses in the 5% that matters the most. Or maybe if you have that soul wound, you don't have any composure, because that's something I also run into with my executives and my entrepreneurs. But decisions you make clearly in the moment and second guess the second you leave the room is really what we're talking about, right? It's like a low grade internal tension that never fully clears. It's not on vacation, it's not on the weekend, it's not even when everything is objectively fine. You're just kind of always feeling it. You know something is off, you can feel the gap, but you maybe you can't name it. And because you can't name it, you can't fix it. And maybe you don't even know the pattern. It's really hard to fix something if you don't know the pattern, if you don't have that self-awareness yet, if you don't have that metacognition yet. And if you can't fix it, then you're just going to stay in that cycle. Now, here's the thing. Maybe you start thinking, I'm smart enough, like I can do this, I can figure this out. Like, why can't I figure myself out though, right? And it's hard to figure out your own self. Like even me, I do this for a living, I analyze people for a living. And sometimes it takes me a little longer than I want to admit for me to go, oh, look, there's a pattern I'm doing, I don't like it. Some of this just takes time, so you got to give yourself grace if you're going to do this independently by yourself. But here's the answer. The gap exists because your external operating system and your internal operating system were built by two different architects at the end of the day. I love parts work. I think parts work is really, really brilliant. So basically your external system, the one that you're showing the world, the one that's actually like you have built the skills, you've built it, right? Like you've really spent time on learning the skills, on learning the abilities at the end of the day. But that internal mindset, we've got to work on that at the end of the day, right? So the external system, right? It's the one that produces the results. It's the one that achieves, it closes the deals, it leads the teams, it builds the companies. That was all built by you, deliberately, intentionally, thoroughly, disciplined. I mean, there was effort, there was intelligence, probably sheer willpower to some degree. That system works. However, your internal system, the one that determines whether you feel adequate, the one that determines whether satisfaction registers, the one that helps you rest and feel safe while resting, because that's real, the one that, no matter what's going on, you just feel always like something is off, whether love lands when it is offered or not. That system, that internal world is built by your childhood. And we don't always have full control over that, obviously, because we're kids. So by the emotional environments you grew up in is really what's causing it. Your nurturance experience really builds your internal architecture, and it starts very, very, very young. I mean, we're talking like 0 to 5 young. And there's certain ages in our psychosocial development that if you have adversity, if you have trauma, if you have neglect, it can hinder you a little bit more. It can hinder you worse. My grammar's not great today. It can hinder you a little bit more than if you had it at 15 or at 25 at the end of the day. So we got to update that internal system because, well, aren't you tired of everything not landing? Of just you always analyzing and being hard on yourself? And here's the coolest thing is updating your internal architecture doesn't have to take very long. My clients see results in 3 sessions. By the very first session, we diagnose everything and have a 99.8% success rate in getting my clients to their goals. So basically, let's just put this in perspective. You're operating a 2026 career on maybe a 1984 emotional operating system. Huge gap, huge disconnect, right? And that operating system has one core directive, and it pretty much boils down to you are not enough, which is toxic shame, produce more. And toxic shame can be manifested in 2 polar opposites, kind of the stereotypical angry, covert, grandiose jerk, if you will, or the high achieving, high performer individual. And that's really what I'm talking about here for this case, for this situation. So that's the gap, right? You are an adult externally and a child internally, we could say. And that's why you can build a company and yet feel empty. And that's why you can close the biggest deal of your life and immediately think, okay, what's next? I need more, right? Because it can even be why your spouse says, you know, I'm proud of you, and you just flinch, right? You're like, I don't want to hear that, right? Because taking compliments very much correlates to this. So your external system earned the win, but your internal system will not let you receive it, will not let you like be in that present moment and really enjoy it. So let's look at what emotional neglect actually does to your brain. I want to go a little deep into the neuroscience. Hopefully it'll make sense. We'll see. We'll just see. Okay. So most likely if you're watching and this is sticking, you're analytical, you like to think in systems, you like to look at patterns, you want the mechanisms, you want the application. You could care less about the motivational hype and BS, if I can be blunt. So this is what it is. Emotional neglect doesn't just create a psychological wound. It restructures your neurology. And this isn't metaphorical, right? We're going to get real. This is measurable, scannable, and actually documented brain changes. So it disrupts your attachment circuitry. I think attachment theory is awesome. I think it's something that more coaches and executive coaches specifically need to be using with their clientele, because most of us just didn't have a great childhood when it comes to that attachment theory avenue, right? You could have a great childhood in the sense of no trauma, nothing severe happening, but still never correctly attached to your parents, to your caregivers at the end of the day. So between ages 0 and 7, the most neuroplastic period of your life, by the way, which is really cool when you think about it, right? Especially as we get older and brain fog is real, especially if you're a hormonal woman. Your brain is going to build the foundational architecture for how you relate to yourself, to others, and to the world during this time period. That is why there's certain crises in psychosocial development, I think Erik Erikson's is the best, that we want to hit so that we can minimize the crises that are going to come in the future. I need to slow down. I'm getting excited. The nerd's coming out. Okay. So this is the attachment formation. If your primary caregivers are emotionally consistent, present, and emotionally attuned, those are the key, then your brain builds what is called a secure attachment model. That is what we want to strive for in all of our relationships. We'll just leave it there. Now, secure attachment is the neurological equivalent of a stable foundation, of building your mental house on like a solid land, right? Versus like marsh or sand, just to put in comparison. And secure attachment is what allows you to trust yourself, trust others, regulate your emotions, have better composure, and feel inherently worthy without external proof. You know, a lot of times people say if you have money, it's going to set you further ahead, and that I'm not going to disagree with that. But as a psychology consultant, I really think that if you have secure attachment and a really solid upbringing, especially between 0 and 7, you're going to be light years ahead. Light years ahead. I can't speak for anyone. I just know for me that having a 10 out of 10 in the adverse childhood experience, which is what we use to measure childhood trauma, I had a 10 out of 10. It took me probably 10 years to fix my internal architecture from like hot mess, if we will. I'm talking about me, so don't anyone personalize it, to like strong and solid and no longer struggling with a lot of the stuff that I had. Now, I was a severe case, right? I just think that's worthy of saying. So there you go. Now, if your caregivers are emotionally inconsistent, which mine was, most likely yours was too, if this is resonating. If they were absent, my dad died on me, wasn't his fault, maybe it was, I don't know, we're not going to get on the weeds. or it was conditional. And this is very, very real. Most families have conditional worth. It's, it's very popular, and certain cultures have it worse than others. I'll just say that. And conditional worth, conditional love can create the same wound that horrible trauma created at the end of the day. So that's how serious conditional love is. Even if your caregivers or your parents were physically present and providing, if they were emotionally inconsistent, if they were absent or had that conditional love, your brain builds an insecure attachment model. Specifically, high performers most commonly develop what is called avoidant attachment. Now, I'll just speak for me. Mine was disorganized, meaning I was anxious and avoidant. And I got all of it at the end of the day. So it was a fun, hot mess I gotta work through. But the reason why high performers typically go more towards an avoidant attachment style is because, some do develop anxious attachment instead, right? But typically we'll see either avoidant or even a mixture. It's very rarely that you'll see an anxious one solely, at least in my experience. I don't want to speak in absolutes because, there's always the exception to the rule at the end of the day. But it's because they overly had to rely on others for validation rather than withdrawing it from themselves, right? Both stem from emotional neglect. The direction the brain goes depends on the specific family system. Family dynamics is very, very real. This is why we're saying in the business world, negativity is a multi-billion-dollar cost at the end of the day, because you're dealing with everybody's poor attachment style, and that's going to impact the bottom line of the company at the end of the day. So bottom line, what this means is your brain learned, I cannot depend on others to meet my emotional needs. So that avoidant person had to overly depend on themselves at an unhealthy level. I didn't clarify that. So it comes down to this mantra of I must meet my own needs. Nobody else can meet my own needs, which is why you might have a boss who cannot delegate or micromanage. Typically, you're dealing with their wound. Exciting, right? Imagine if we all had psychology degrees. And then sometimes you'll even have the thought needing people is dangerous. It's unsafe. If I share, if I'm vulnerable. This is very true if you've had people weaponize your needs against you. I've had that. It's not fun. Don't ever weaponize stuff against people. It's just emotionally immature. Or you'll start to have this contract with yourself. You'll start to build a wall, keep people at arm's length, and you'll say, I will become so self-sufficient that I never have to be vulnerable again. And there is a heavy level of self-righteousness in that thinking, but it makes sense because you're trying to protect yourself. And your brain is going to always want to keep you safe before anything else. Now, does this sound familiar? Because it definitely was my reality. Maybe it's your reality. It's a lot of the realities for my clients. And it's not independence, but it's easy to think it's independence. But it's actually trauma adaptation masquerading as strength. And it rewires your reward system. And that is why nothing can feel satisfying, because your brain has a reward circuitry. And the mesolimbic dopamine pathway, some of these words are going to be difficult for me to say because my blood sugar is low, so give me grace. That's designed to produce feelings of satisfaction, pleasure, and enough when you achieve something meaningful. And, we tell people who, let's just use marijuana for a second. If you are a heavy user of marijuana, of weed, then we'll tell people when you quit, understand that your dopamine receptors are going to be a little finicky for perhaps 6 months. And so everything might be really, really dull. So, if you just take an addiction to marijuana, for instance, and you go, oh, life's going to feel dull for the next 6 months because your dopamine receptors are going to have to take some time to rewire and reorganize themselves, it kind of makes sense why everything will feel blah. But we take that to emotional neglect and we say, hey, your entire existence you've had emotional neglect. It's going to take a hot minute for all that to change once you do that internal work. I hope that analogy makes sense. Now, in a securely attached brain, the system works normally, and that's what we can recreate. You can heal yourself. It is possible. It just takes work. And that means when you have a secure attachment in your brain, and your brain has the healthy dopamine receptors that we want to feel that joy, to feel that excitement, that means you win, you feel the win, and you can rest, right? It's not, oh, that was fun, what's next, right? And that's typically what you'll experience when it's never enough. In a brain shaped by In a brain shaped by emotional neglect, this system is fundamentally altered. The reward threshold is elevated, meaning you need bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger outcomes to feel anything at all. I'm talking about nanoseconds of feeling just something. And that satisfaction duration is compressed, meaning even when you do feel something, even if it's a nanosecond, it evaporates almost instantaneously. And this is why you can make, let's just say, $100,000 a week and feel nothing by Friday. It's not greed. It's not that you're ungrateful, though you might think that. I know I did for a hot minute. It's not ambition, though it can look like it. It's a neurological reward system that was damaged by neglect and now requires extreme input to register any output at all. And this is also why you move the goalpost, right? Or you might even send mixed signals. Your brain has learned that satisfaction is temporary and unreliable because as a child, emotional nourishment was also temporary and unreliable. See how it kind of connects there? So it doesn't let you land on wins, not because you don't want to, but because we've got to do some rewiring, we could say, in your brain. Landing then starts to feel dangerous when you have had that emotional neglect because you're just waiting for it to be taken away. And, sometimes we want to create the control, and so we'll kind of shift the playing field. Now, it locks your limbic system into threat mode. Now, I can't speak for you, but until about 2017, my entire brain was overly hypervigilant. I was literally dying because I was in so much high alert, so much hypervigilance. I had so much fear. My body was shutting down. My system was collapsing. I had literally no immune system. I was actually told to go live in a bubble. And I was like, yeah, that's not going to happen. I laugh because it's just, some of the stuff is just insane, right? But it's true, right? So we want to heal the limbic system. Some people have overly developed limbic systems because of all of the neglect or abuse that they've developed, but you can restore it. Praise God for that, literally. So your limbic system, the survival brain, it helps code things, it helps build associations. It's like the first part of your brain that really is online, we could say, or one of the first parts. So your limbic system, because it looks at associations and codes everything, learned early that your emotional environment was unpredictable, and that helped keep you safe because that's part of your limbic system's job too. So maybe dad had rage, maybe your brother or your sister had rage issues and you were a little thing, and so that rage was really scary for you. Maybe the family went from wealth to poverty before you could spell your name. Maybe the household looked stable on the outside but felt like a war zone like mine on the inside, which is in some ways actually worse because a child in that environment then learns to distrust their own perception of reality. Now, your amygdala, which sits kind of on your prefrontal cortex and your, it's kind of in the middle of your brain, we'll just say, is your threat detection center. It works really well with your limbic system, sometimes to your deficit, and it encodes those early experiences as baselines. And the amygdala has the emotional maturity, this is kind of, I'm just saying this more slightly, don't take this verbatim, has the emotional maturity of like a 2 to 3 year old. Imagine if a 2 to 3 year old ran your life. That would be exhausting. This is why we really want to start challenging our thoughts sometimes and just really growing our awareness, because we can have such irrational thoughts. So your amygdala has the emotional maturity of a 2 to 3 year old. I'm not saying that insulting, it's just some of the data, and it's developmental neuroscience. So once it encodes a threat pattern, your amygdala, it fires that pattern for life, which is why rewiring your brain out of hypervigilance can feel really exhausting. That's at least was the case for me, unless it's deliberately and clinically retrained. So when you're in a high stakes moment and things go against you, your 40, 50, however old you are, prefrontal cortex knows it's manageable, assuming you've done the work to really get your prefrontal cortex online, but your amygdala thinks you're 5 years old, watching everything fall apart again, right? Again, why parts work can be so amazing for the executive. And then it hijacks you. And if you do not have good top to bottom, bottom to top brain regulation, which not a lot of people do have, then you're going to get hijacked at the end of the day. And so you abandon the plan, right? You go impulsive, you chase recovery instead of trusting the process. Maybe you go to your addiction to have some momentary relief or escapism, or maybe you snap at someone you respect and then you replay that conversation for days. That is not a character flaw. That is a limbic system that was trained by emotional neglect to treat every setback as an existential threat. Some of this is just basic science that we just don't really get taught, unfortunately. And what happens is it creates a implicit memory that you can't access consciously. And this is the piece that most people miss, in my opinion. So trauma between ages 0 and 7 is stored as implicit memory, meaning it lives in your body and your nervous system, meaning you can't always put it into words, but you know what happened. And it's not in your conscious narrative. So you can't remember it in the traditional sense. You can't like journal your way through it or to it. It's really even hard to even articulate, right? You can't think your way through it. There's no words. It just has sensations. It's a lot of somatic sensations at the end of the day. Maybe it's tightness to the chest, a feeling of dread you can't explain, agitation, irritation that shows up right before you sabotage a perfectly good plan. And this is why you've told yourself, I don't know why I do this. Because the reason lives in a part of your brain that language cannot access. It's not that you lack self-awareness. I mean, you could need to improve your self-awareness. You could need to improve your metacognition by all means. But it's that the wound predates your capacity for conscious thought, meaning it was installed in your brain before you had language, before you might have even known how to speak. And so now it's going to operate below the surface of everything you think, of everything you feel, of everything that you do. And basically it fragments your identity. Now, here's the deepest cut. And I'll say it twice. Emotional neglect does not just affect how you think or how you feel. It affects who you believe you are. I'll say that again. Emotional neglect does not just affect how you think or how you feel. It affects who you believe you are. Because when a child's worth is never mirrored back unconditionally, which is the power of that emotional connection, of emotional attunement, when love is always tied to a performance or you're just utterly ignored and they don't see the individuality and the personality and the agency of you, right? They override it. Then the child builds what psychologists call as a false self. Now, in my opinion, of working with over 500 people, most people have false self-images. Most people can't bear to face the reality of their lives because it would literally crush and destroy their soul. I don't say that to be mean or cruel. I don't. It's just, number one, been my personal experience, and it's definitely been my professional experience at a data recorded mentality. And so, and honestly, the modern world, the culture, especially in the first world, kind of pushes us to build false selves. It's kind of just the reality of the cookie right now. And so a false self is a performing self. It's an identity constructed entirely around output, achievement, and external validation. There is no internal reality at the end of the day. And the false self is who you are at work, in the boardroom, on the call, in the room where the stakes are the highest, and it's like extraordinarily effective, we could say. So it's easy to hide behind it. And it has to be because it was built for your survival. But underneath that false self is the true self. And typically I actually wrote my thesis on this. Sometimes it's like frozen in time to whenever that really big breach happened. Like maybe your true self is stuck at age 7 before all the trauma happened at the end of the day. But underneath that false self is the true self, and it's the one that no one has ever seen, no one validates. It's you never heard, or you were never told like, hey, you are good enough. And maybe you've also broken away, you've detached, you've split from that part of yourself too. And that true self is truly starving. And maybe it's trying to get your attention. Maybe you're learning right now too. And most likely it's been starving for decades if you're honest with yourself. And that emptiness you feel when nothing satisfies, that is not about the deal, the gifts, the number, whatever is the external objective in front of you, or whatever quote unquote should have brought you that joy, that satisfaction. It's actually your true self screaming, I'm still here. No one has ever seen me. And no amount of performance is going to fix that. Because really what you want is for someone to see you. To see you, the true you. To see the human being you are. Not the human doing, the human being that you are, to see your unique thoughts, your individuality. That is a very precious gift. Now, how does this destroy your performance at work? Let's connect it directly to your professional life for a second, because this isn't just an internal experience, believe it or not. Emotional neglect is actively, it can, at least this is what I see with my clients sometimes, sabotaging your leadership and your decision making and even your income, believe it or not. So execution will stall, meaning you know what to do, you have the plan is good, you know the plan is good, but somewhere between creating the plan and pulling the trigger or executing, you freeze. You freeze. Maybe you practice even more avoidant behaviorism. Or you overwrite it, or you decide it's not good enough and you start all over again. So you spend like months on something that really should have taken a few weeks. And that's not necessarily perfectionism as a personality trait. Sure, there's going to be elements of that in there. But it's shame-driven belief that if your execution isn't flawless, it proves you're inadequate. So we're still thinking at this very simplistic association mentality that you adopted as a kid. We've got to update that identity. So then what happens is you either delay until conditions are perfect, which honestly they never are, they never will be, or you abandon the plan entirely because the risk of imperfect execution feels like the risk of being exposed. And so your false self still wants to guard your true self at the end of the day. And then we have decision fatigue and second guessing, meaning you make the call, it's the right call, and the second you leave the room, the second you pull the trigger, you start dismantling it. Not because you lack confidence, because your confidence is wired to outcomes, not to identity. And, I was talking with one of my clients yesterday, and we've worked together for about 3 years, and I was like, what do you think's been the biggest thing that I've helped you with in these 3 years? He's like, I finally know who I am, and I just don't care about these people outside of my nuclear unit anymore. Like, I know who I am, I know what's important to me, and I don't care to please you anymore. So I can actually operate at a higher level because I know who I am, I know who I'm not, I know what I want to do. Like, the clarity is so clear, allows me to now sprint even faster. And he runs a very successful company. So it's really crazy. And I can even speak for myself, right? Because he's much further in business than I am. That knowing who I am and not giving two craps about what anyone thinks really does allow you to execute at a much faster level. Don't say that to be mean or cruel. I say that because it's just true at the end of the day. Okay, so when you are struggling with this emotional neglect wound, I went on a tangent, it can impact your decisions. You can get decision fatigue, you can second guess, because really your decisions are really very much tied to your worth. Like you've increased the stakes of the decision at a level that it doesn't need to connect to at the end of the day. So again, you think in that association, if it works, you're safe, you're valuable temporarily. If it fails, it's not just a bad decision, it's like I should go off myself. Like you spiral into this very doom and gloom mentality, and it's proof that you are what you've always feared you are, which is maybe a failure, maybe a piece of crap, whatever the verbiage is for you, you'll know that intrinsically. And that level of psychological stakes on every decision is exhausting. So exhausting, so time consuming. And it's why you can feel drained in ways that have nothing to do with your actual workload. Burnout is usually tied to negative thinking more than to output. Now, the other thing is your composure, your ability to stay emotionally regulated, collapses under pressure. I will be honest, when I first started doing psychometric testing, I had an opinion of high performers because I thought they were so much better than me, because I was very wounded at this point in my life. And I just remember when I started seeing, I've done over 1,000 psychometrics, and I was like, wow, this person is like I, to a degree, I guess I idolize them, might be a strong word. And then I would look at their self-confidence or their self-discipline traits, and I was like, oh gosh, they've got no emotional composure. They've got no self-confidence. And I was like, oh, they're just like me. Maybe there's a chance here, right? Like I can heal myself too. So there you go. I gave you some disclosure there. But pretty much when we have our composure collapses under pressure, this typically means you can do a good job of holding it together. It doesn't mean internally you're not screaming or wanting to have a tantrum or wanting to flip a table or something. But eventually you're going to snap. Eventually the cracks are going to show. Eventually you're going to leak out all of the emotional pain. And to some degree, or you shut down entirely. That also happens. Or you replay everything day after day after day. And that's your limbic system overwhelming your prefrontal cortex. And it took honestly, it took over before your rational brain could intervene. It's very, very fast at the end of the day. You can slow it down by just having good brain habits at the end of the day. But because you're a high performer, you don't just feel the failure of composure. You feel the shame of it. And then you're doing a great job of kicking yourself even more because you, quote unquote, missed the bar. And so now you're just stuck in this vicious, I call it a limbic loop cycle. Now let's look, the other thing too is trust deficits with your team, right? When you're struggling with this wound, when you're struggling with this pain, it can create a lot of deficits in the leadership position. Because basically you can't delegate, because delegation requires what? Trusting someone else to meet your standard. And sometimes we're not great at communicating what that standard is. And your standard isn't really a professional standard. If we are really honest, it's a survival standard. Meaning if they don't do it right, it reflects on you. So they're now an extension of you, which can flirt onto some narcissistic tendencies. I think narcissism is overused. So I'm saying tendencies. I'm not saying you're a narcissist. I'm saying it's narcissistic tendencies. And so then you're like, well, this is going to reflect on me negatively. And it proves the thing you've been running from since childhood, which is you have to hold everything. You have to do everything. You have to micromanage everything. You have to do it yourself. And then you resent your team, whatever, for not stepping up, even though you're not realizing that you never gave them the room to, right? And you have to remember, our mind is going to look for evidence to uphold and confirm our self-concept and our beliefs. So if you already have the belief I have to do everything myself, it's going to be really easy to prove this belief in this situation. Because again, you don't have high standards. You have survival standards that are going to always be impossible to meet. The other thing is it creates reactive leadership, meaning your team starts to walk on eggshells. You know it, you hate it, maybe you have a boss that you have to walk on eggshells with right now. I mean, come on guys, grow up. Like, I just want to say that because at some point we got to put the childish toys behind us. But you don't know how to stop it maybe. And I don't say any of this to condemn you. I'm just going to be direct and blunt. There's no point for me to lie to you. Because the reactivity isn't strategic, it's limbic. It's your limbic system. And when incompetence triggers you, when things move too slowly, when someone doesn't execute the way you would, the emotion that fires isn't typically proportional to the situation. It's proportional to the wound. I don't know about you, but when I learned that, I was like, that makes a lot more sense. Tremendous sense, right? Because you're not angry about the missed deadline. You're angry because the missed deadline activated the part of your brain that says, if things aren't controlled, everything falls apart, just like it did when I was a kid. The other thing it hits is income ceiling. Here's the one that really costs you. And Harvard's done a lot of research on self-confidence correlating to how much money you earn and like what you believe you're worth. So this is real at the end of the day. If you are in business and you want to make money, listen. Emotional neglect creates I don't love the word subconscious, but a subconscious set point for what you believe you deserve. Not what you think you deserve, but what you think you deserve at the end of the day, right? Wait, I said that wrong. So it's not what you think you deserve, it's you think you deserve everything. That is what I'm trying to say. A lot of everything's there. So what your nervous system believes you deserve is what I'm trying to say at the end of the day. And if your nervous system was programmed by emotional neglect, by, hey, you suck, you're a piece of crap, you're never going to amount to anything, you're not good enough, you're not worthy, and you just spend your whole life staying small, that's not really the standard we want, right? So you then set a point that is lower than your capability. So you'll earn to a certain level and then you sabotage it. We see it all the time. Harvard's done a lot of research on this if you want to check it out. So pretty much what happens, and I've seen it with a few of my clients, is you'll get close to the breakthrough and then you'll pull back. You'll make a $400,000 deal and feel like you should be making $2 million, right? So it's still not good enough. Maybe it's the first time you've ever made $400,000, right? But you're like, well, it should be $2 million, right? So there, we just have a cognitive distortion in that. But every time the path to $2 million opens, oh man, something inside of you, hits the brakes and change the numbers to whatever resonates for you. But that's not a strategy problem, believe it or not. Most people don't have strategy problems as high performers. Typically, they have identity problems. They have confidence problems because, AI has made it a little bit easier, in my opinion, for business owners and executives, making work less daunting. But there's still so much work as a business owner that you look at, you're like, oh my gosh, I can't do that. Huge anxiety. I need to run away. And, sometimes, I'm forgetting the word, but there's a form of healthy a distraction that's good for you, and I've just totally lost that, where you just kind of take a moment, you distract yourself, and you come back. But we can't have this if we're trying to ultimately reach the ceiling and reach our fullest potential. This is why I love being a business owner, because you can grow so much when you're a business owner at the end of the day. So let me be direct about what the path forward actually requires, and I'm going to tell you the what so that you can start doing it. Now, the how is harder for me to articulate because I've got to really evaluate all of you to be specifically precise to your lived experience and how you're wired and so forth. So that's going to depend on like specific wiring, your specific wound, your specific root architecture. Like that's very customizable. But the what is fairly universal for the wound. The root belief has to be identified with surgical precision. You cannot change something if you do not see the patterns. It's going to be very difficult. You can't change something if you don't think you have an issue. That's also very difficult at the end of the day. And it's not, I have low confidence, right? Because that's a little bit of a symptom. It's not, I'm a perfectionist, because that's actually a behavior. The root is very specific. It's very implicit. It's very neurologically embedded belief that is running beneath everything. And typically it's like a handful of traits or a handful of things. It's like tangled jewelry, in my opinion. So it might sound something like this. I'm only lovable when I perform. Again, you created that equation. I think last week we talked about, why you always feel like a fraud. Or if I stop producing, I'll be abandoned. Or maybe it's I'm fundamentally insufficient and no amount of success will ever change that. So you give up before you even start. Here's the reality. Safety, feeling safe, requires control, the control that you actually have, because a lot of people want control that's not truly control. And control requires perfection. Like that is what some people will start to believe when they've had this emotional neglect. And so you've got to get really clear on what's truly in your control and what's not in your control, and then how to lean into that humanity too. Now, every high performer's root is slightly different. I mean, we could boil it down to being the same to some degree, but it's going to be shaped by their specific neglect, by the meaning they made out of that, by their specific family system, by their specific implicit memories, by their specific wiring, their nurturance, their nature. Like there's so many components that you want to analyze at the end of the day to really kind of bottom line it. And in my opinion, it's got to be very, very precise. This is why a lot of my clients say I do like soul surgery, because we have to get in there and we've got to like figure out like what do we need to triage first at the end of the day, just to get you steady so that we can start getting rid of all the toxicity and cleaning it out. And it can take time, but it doesn't take as much time as you think it might take at the end of the day. This is why I'm not a big fan of generalized coaching. I personally never had good experiences in therapy. Now, as being a trained therapist and having a degree in it, I now know I had personally too much trauma for the average or for most therapists, and that's a reality. And let's be honest, it is exhausting trying to find the person that works for you. So I get it. But behavioral therapy can't do this and typically don't touch it. It's actually interesting when you start to read the data on all of this. One of the things that helps me get my clients changing so fast is I have spent 5 years building these psychometric assessments, because that was my background, and clinical pattern analysis that we also focus on your linguistics, that we can look and within our very first sessions, like, okay, this is everything that has to be fixed. These are the questions you answered. Is this resonating? Is it not? I have 100% yes, this resonates. Sometimes there's tweaks, but that's it. So we've got to really get to the like basic wiring of you so we can figure out what is quote unquote faulty or toxic and then get rid of it. I hope that makes sense and it's not like a dig. So the implicit memory also has to be accessed and processed. Sometimes we've got to do trauma therapy or trauma therapy techniques. We don't have to do it. Trauma therapy is really modernized in recent years, because you have to remember that the wound lives in your body. The body keeps score. Great book. It's not in your conscious narrative when it is an implicit memory. Memory is fascinating to me. And this is why, again, journaling, meditating about it, thinking your way through it, it doesn't really typically work. Sometimes you have to somatically access it through the body, through the nervous system, which can be scary in itself, right? Sometimes we can't hit the nervous system level of healing because we still got to heal the soul before you're even able to face the nervous system, which I wish someone had told me that sooner, so hopefully that helps you. And we do it through the implicit memory structures that stored it before you had the language, and there's a very simplistic way to do it. And this is where most coaches and even some therapists fail with high performers. I also hear from my clients, therapists take too long, sometimes coaches don't get it, and they typically want someone to stay at their level. My phone keeps buzzing the crap out of me. Okay. So the neural pathways have to be rewired. Neurons that fire together, wire together. Most likely you've spent decades running the nothing is enough loop, right? Nothing ever satisfies me. It's never good enough. And so those connections are super highways that we need to start to block and then starve the neurons. New pathways then have to be deliberately constructed through targeted neuroplasticity work, specific identity. Declarations can sometimes work, the mantras, visualization, and cognitive restructuring done consistently over time. And the research is very, very clear. If you practice becoming who you want to be mentally, if you mentally work out, because thinking changes your neurology, with specificity and emotional engagement for accumulation of 60 minutes a day for 180 days straight, your neurology physically changes. And you can actually be 90% of that person in 6 months' time if you do this every single day. Now, sometimes there's lots of bundled actions in what you're trying to be, so you'll get more clarity at the end. I got blood work done. It's driving me insane. Okay, it's not affirmations, it's not mantra crap, because my clients and myself included can't handle the hype and the superficial crap. We want depth, we want to fix it, we want surgery, we want it in and out at the end of the day. You have to rebuild your identity from the root up. Behavior modification is what most therapists do, it's what most coaches do. It never works, never does. I don't know who or why we started doing it, but it's not the way you want to go. And we got to figure out where your false self is and where your true self is. And it's actually really easy to do. It's kind of fun work. So we've got to figure out, we've got to start separating and identifying and labeling the performing self, the one that entered through that earned love through output mentality, right? The one that was constructed out of survival, because at one point it did help you survive, has to be compassionately retired. You want a dry erase wetboard. I don't know what that means. And then we've got to identify that true self and the one that was never seen, never validated, never given permission to exist without producing. You got to start building trust with that person because it's the true self, right? You got to start listening to that voice. You've got to find that. You've got to name it. You've got to give it a foundation that doesn't depend on the scoreboard. I tell my one-on-one clients, we've got to disconnect the umbilical cord that ties your worth to your achievements because you're setting yourself up for failure. You're building a house on sand. Okay, then we have to look at the emotional circuitry because that has to be restored, if not learned. A lot of people don't even have it. You have to learn to feel again. You have to learn your emotions. I have a course right now. It is biblically fused. It's called Navigating Emotions the Jesus Way. It teaches you how to just learn how to navigate your emotions. Not master them, but learn how to befriend them and navigate them. It's not in a sit in a circle and cry, right? Because my clients are just not going to handle that. I'm not going to handle that. But it is in a clinical, precise, neurological way. Your satisfaction circuitry has to be repaired so that good things land and stay instead of evaporating. So there's some retraining that you almost have to do. And your threat responses has to be retrained so that the rest feels safe instead of dangerous. And depending on how hypervigilant you've been, this can take some time. And that's typically the worst news I'll ever tell you is it's going to take some time. And you have to have the gumption to keep trying. And you have to learn to give and receive true agape love. I do think the Bible has the best definition of love. You have to learn how to give praise, learn how to accept praise, learn how to give and accept gifts and rest and even satisfaction without flinching. Because right now, receiving probably triggers the shame, and that's the neglect wound talking. And so you've got to start to distinguish that at the end of the day. Now, the source of worth has to also be relocated. This is sometimes the hardest one. It really is going to depend on your background, but it's also the most important, because as long as your worth is anchored to your output, nothing's ever going to change. You're going to stay in that pattern. Nothing's ever going to be enough at the end of the day, because output fluctuate. Markets change at the end of the day, and sometimes there's variables that are not in your control, and that's just the reality of the cookie. There is no guarantee in business. None. Zero. Zip. This is why we have to have a healthy risk tolerance at the end of the day. It's hard to read comments and stay focused. I do appreciate the comments though. That's a very simplistic, overgeneralized statement in my opinion. Okay, where was I? So you've got to start to relocate your sense of worth. Now, for me, what helped me get grounded on this was really getting to know and have a relationship with Jesus Christ. But religion is not for everybody. I don't push it on people. In fact, I hate religion. A relationship with Jesus is very, very different than religion, in my opinion. So we've got to reallocate that at the end of the day. So pretty much, just to recap, we've got to figure out the root beliefs that have, we've got to like be very surgical identifying all of the roots. I call them weeds in my practice, like the weeds that are polluting your mental garden. We've got to get all of those, because they're going to be tangled like jewelry. We've got to untangle them. We've got to put the correct nutrients in the soil, because that will kill the weeds for good. And then you'll learn when those nutrients are depleted so that you can do it, which is why you don't have to stay with a coach or a therapist forever. We've got to figure out the implicit memories. They've got to be accessed and processed effectively and in a time period that works for you. Some people are going to be ready to deal with them very quickly. Some people need a little bit more time to process it, because it can be very, very scary. Then we've got to look at the neural pathways. They've got to be rewired at the end of the day. The rewiring work to me is the funnest work to do. Then we've got to rebuild the identity from the root up, not behavior modification. It doesn't work. Then we've got to restore the emotional circuitry, right? That's got to be restored. And then that source of worth has to be relocated at the end of the day. Now, why is nothing ever enough? Because again, you're trying to fill a neglect wound with achievement. And achievement is the wrong currency for that debt. And you probably know this, but might not have the language for it. Maybe you just want your mom, your dad, maybe your spouse, maybe someone in your past just to see you. Maybe you're just so tired of feeling misunderstood, and you just want to be seen and appreciated and have someone be curious with how you think, with how you see the world, with your thoughts, with your beliefs, in a way that's psychologically safe, where you can really share and then really have a fun, deep discussion about it. That's what a lot of my clients typically say that they really wish they had at some point. But a lot of people don't have that capacity or aren't wired that way, and so we do have to meet people where they are. We need to remember that achievement is the wrong currency for this debt, though. The wound does not want more money. It doesn't want bigger wins, right? You might think you do, and it's easy to get it distorted. It wants to be seen. And one of the first things you can also do, I don't know why I didn't say this, is start seeing yourself. Start participating more with that true self. Start learning to set boundaries. Start learning to speak up. Start testing stuff. Start getting comfortable in conflict. A lot of people have the incorrect definition of conflict. Always find it funny. But here's the thing. Your definition of enough was broken most likely before you were old enough to know it was being installed. And to me, that's sad. There are things that you have to mourn on your way to healing. You have to grieve. You have to lament sometimes, which is again why I like the Bible, because it talks about the difference of just grieving and lamenting, and just the reality, the humanism of that at the end of the day. And then just having that comfort of something supernatural is so powerful. Because here's the thing, to heal some of these wounds, I've spent years studying psychology to fix myself. My background is in television producing. And then I went to the psychology route. I have 2 graduate degrees in it now, because I was so tired of being mentally tortured inside. You've got to start to identify what you need and start doing the work at the end of the day. You have to start updating your definitions and updating your opinions of things, but sometimes that's really messy and you don't necessarily know where to start, and I totally get that. But here's what I hope you hold on to if this is resonating, or if maybe you're feeling a little hopeless or overwhelmed, because I did share a lot with you. I know it's got a little jumbled, so I do appreciate your grace. This is all fixable. You can heal all of this, and it doesn't take as much time as you think. It took me 10 years because I did it all myself. It takes my clients 3 to 5 sessions we say 4 sessions on average to really get all the nitty gritty out, and then we just fine tune things. It's pretty incredible at the end of the day. I mean, wouldn't that be worth it at the end of the day? But here's the thing, you are enough. I need you to start telling yourself that you're enough. In fact, look in the mirror if you don't believe you're enough and say, man, I love you. Look at your own eyes and say, I love you. That is one of the most powerful things you can do. Now, if you're interested in working with me, if you'd like to learn more about that, you're more than welcome to apply for a consultation, and we will, my team or myself will get that going. I do have a 99.8% success rate that is documented. You will see you'll start to see your mindset shifting by the second session. The first session, we do all the diagnosing. The complimentary session is really where I do all the diagnosing. Then the very first session, I explain all the diagnosing. It's a very long, very thorough session. Clients are always blown away by it. The second session, your mindset, really by the beginning, your mindset is already shifted. By the 5th session, I reintroduce myself because I'm like, who is this person in front of me? Because you are so radically different, because we have done the identity work. We do not do behavior modification, cannot stand behavior modification. You can do behavior modification once you have a solid identity, but if you don't have a good identity, then why are you trying to modify anything? You gotta reconstruct. But to each their own. So if you're interested, you are more than welcome to DM me. You can say the word enough or just consultation, and myself or my team, because I'm not always on my social media, will make sure to get you the link for you to apply. Do appreciate you guys hanging out today. My blood sugar is dropping. It's been a crazy morning. So I am going to go run and get some food, but I will see you hopefully Friday. I don't know if I got a new computer too, so I feel like my audio and my lips are not fully syncing. I'll have to look into that. Does it look like I'm syncing? I don't know. There's a delay on Instagram, so it's sometimes hard to identify. Anyways, I will see you guys soon. My house is done, so I will be doing more lives soon. Have a good one.